Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, I'm going to be addressing the St. Louis Blues' biggest needs in this offseason and how they might go about filling those needs. We're going to be talking about the Springfield Thunderbirds falling to 2-1 down in the series against the Chicago Wolves in the Colorado Cup Finals, plus the Colorado Avalanche going up 3-1 in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Tampa Bay Lightning on a controversial overtime winner. Busy episode, lots to talk about. Make sure you stay tuned.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman, and I got a busy episode for you guys today. Like I said, first things first, when we're going through a checklist of a couple of the biggest needs for the Blues this offseason, biggest question marks. I'm probably going to be addressing a lot of these points multiple times. So, think of this as sort of the second check-in of the various topics that the Blues need to address. It's probably going to be similar takes, but as we get closer to the draft or free agency or trades or whatever, it'll probably change a little bit. So I'm going to be getting into that stuff here in this first segment. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to thank anyone and everyone out there for making Locked On Blues your first listen, because we are free and available on all podcast platforms. All right, so without further ado, let's check into the Blues off-season status, a couple of their big needs, like I said, and see where they're at right now. About a week or so left, if that, in the season. I guess it could end tonight, technically. But, a few days left in the season, in the playoffs. So we haven't really reached a time where it's 100% the Blues' first priority is addressing these needs. But it's definitely a little bit clearer now than it was, 2 weeks ago when I talked about it for the first time. So first things first, goaltending situation. Who's going to be the starter? Who's going to be the backup? What happens with Ville Husso? Now, this was a question that I think was a little bit more up in the air a couple months ago before Jordan Binnington had his resurgence. Now, I think, we don't even have to have a whole lot of debate. I think it's pretty apparent, pretty obvious that Jordan Binnington is the starter for next year and years moving forward. The Blues are paying him like a starter. He struggled in the regular season. He struggled in the season before that, but in the playoffs this year, before he got injured, he was really, really strong, really, really consistent, and, sort of returned to form of the Jordan Binnington of old. So Jordan Binnington is the starter, no question. Now it really comes down to Ville Husso, Charlie Lindgren, and Joel Hofer in terms of that backup spot. Now, could it be Ville Husso? Maybe. I doubt it. He's a free agent right now. The Blues would have to bring him back on a pretty cheap, team-friendly deal. They've got a couple other guys to bring back in David Perron and Nick Leddy if they wanted to go that route. And I think Ville Husso would honestly probably be the third priority out of those three guys. Not that Ville Husso wasn't great. He got a vote for Vezina. He was a really good goaltender this year. He might have been the reason the Blues were able to make the playoffs through Jordan Binnington's struggles. But he also probably earned himself a pretty hefty contract with that. He's approaching 28 years old. He's going to want to cash in on that deal right now. And the chances of him taking a team-friendly contract with the St. Louis Blues are pretty low. And I don't think the Blues are going to want to be paying, a combined $10-11 million for two goalies. So, because of that, I think Ville Husso is going to walk and he's going to sign a deal with another team to be their starter, which good for him. He's earned that. That being said, though, brings the question, who's going to be the backup for the Blues? Is it going to be Joel Hofer or is it going to be Charlie Lindgren? Earlier, I was pretty confident, a couple episodes ago, a couple weeks ago, whatever. I was pretty confident that it would be Joel Hofer. But Tommy at the time pointed out that Hofer is a little bit young and Charlie Lindgren does have that experience. And I think some of the performances in the Colorado Cup Finals have proven that Hofer still has a little bit to prove. But Charlie Lindgren has, he's a journeyman goalie. He's a long-term goalie. He's proven that he could be a NHL quality goaltender. So for that reason, I think Charlie Lindgren will end up being the backup for the St. Louis Blues as it stands currently. I wouldn't be surprised if things change, if Hofer or Lindgren or someone is offered up in a trade. And that's something I'm sort of getting into in the beginning of the second segment here, talking about a couple potential trades for the St. Louis Blues, I think some of their holes can only really be filled with trades because the free agency market isn't exactly super profitable this season. for teams like the St. Louis Blues. So I'm going to be getting into that in the second segment after I wrap up this goalie talk. But yeah, I mean, look, I think the Blues have had this quote unquote problem for a while, and that's having a bit of a carousel at the goaltending position. But it's a good problem to have. You always want the goaltending position to be stacked. Saw what happened in 2019. The Blues brought up a no-name goaltender named Jordan Binnington, and he happened to lead them to a Stanley Cup. So as much as, it's going to hurt probably seeing Ville Husso walk and go play somewhere else, we'll also get a chance to see Charlie Lindgren, Joel Hofer, Colton Ellis, guys just in the system get bigger roles, whether it's a backup goaltending job with the St. Louis Blues or a starting goaltending job with the Springfield Thunderbirds, and what will likely be Joel Hofer's reward with the Lindgren promotion. So couple things to follow along with there. Like I said, in the second segment, I'll be talking about the Blues' probable biggest need in the offseason, and that is a defenseman, whether it's going to be bringing back Nick Leddy or going for a trade or something. I'm going to be talking about that and more. But before I get into that, I wanted to let you guys know about betonline.net. Now, betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right. So, talked about the goaltending. That's sort of a big question mark, but let's be honest. The Blues need a defenseman. Defense let them down throughout the regular season and a little bit in the playoffs. Playoffs was sort of just they got beat by a better team, but ever since Alex Pietrangelo left, there has been a pair of shoes to fill, or I said a pair of skates to fill that have yet to be filled. Colton Parayko, Justin Falk, Torrey Krug have done a good job of kind of filling in by commission. The Blues defense is certainly good with depth in that regard, in the sense that, like I said, Parayko, Falk, and Krug are all really good defensemen and did a really good job this year in moments. Parayko, obviously a little underwhelming at times, but I think for the most part, what you're getting out of Colton Parayko, and, he's a reliable defenseman. He's never going to be what the storybook version of Colton Parayko is, that Colton Parayko that we saw for flashes there in that cup run where he was looking like a true number one dominant defenseman. I think a lot of Blues fans, myself included, got the notion that he was going to continue to progress and turn into one of the best defensemen in the league. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. But that doesn't mean he's not a very serviceable defenseman in his role. I think Colton Parayko is a very good defenseman. I think, he helps the Blues out. He's a net positive on the team. And, he's not that number one guy. He also hasn't played with a consistent D partner in a very long time. The defense has been pretty much a carousel in terms of who's playing where. And the Blues haven't had a set 1-2 since Alex Pietrangelo left. So because of that, I think Colton Parayko's gotten a little bit of an unfair rep. I think, when he's had a consistent D partner, he's played a lot better. And when he's had a guy that he can rely on at that position, he's played a lot better. But a lot of his minutes have come, with alongside Nico Mikkola or Marco Scandella when he's been struggling. He hasn't really had an opportunity to just, be in a comfortable spot where he is one of two defensemen that is really solid, really good. And he doesn't have to sort of do it all. I think a lot of times Colton Parayko's been out there with the Blues like sixth best defenseman, because Colton Parayko has the ability to sort of soften the blow and make it a little bit easier to stick a defenseman that's not as good out there, because Parayko is as good as he is. But I think Parayko's at his best when he has another really good defenseman to rely on that can sort of take some of the weight off of his shoulders and let him play a little more freely. And I think in order to get back to that, the number one thing, honestly, beyond going out and adding a defenseman, is just staying healthy. I think once Torrey Krug went down, it really screwed up the Blues defensive rotations. The defense was playing really, really strong when Torrey Krug was healthy, during that last stretch of the regular season, and even a little bit in the playoffs as well, after Torrey Krug even went down. But there's only so much that they could do without a guy like Torrey Krug in the lineup. The pairings got messed up. Like I said, Parayko wasn't playing as consistently with, top quality defense talent, and it showed. So I think, if the Blues defense can remain healthy next season, along with a guy like Scott Perunovich coming in and producing really well, I think Perunovich is going to surprise a lot of people. We know what he can do offensively, and that's no secret, but I think he's a lot more capable defensively than a lot of people think. I think people just see an undersized defenseman and assume that Scott Perunovich is going to be a liability in that end, sort of like Torrey Krug. And, Torrey Krug does what he can defensively. He's just, 5'9". There's only so much he can do. Scott Perunovich is a little bit bigger than Torrey Krug. But, I think people look at him and just assume it's going to be a similar sort of player, and they see Perunovich's success on the power play and his success offensively and assume that he's just going to be a pushover defensively. Now, obviously, he's no Victor Hedman, out there with a stick that covers half the defensive zone. He's just not big enough for that, but he can hold his own defensively. He's great positionally, and he's hard to knock off the puck, and he does a really good job of winning the puck battle. So I hope that Perunovich will have a bigger role this upcoming season, maybe even a top 4 role, depending on what the Blues go out and do, especially because I'm assuming Nick Leddy will not be back. Perunovich will kind of take his role, and I'm excited to see what he can do. I think he can be, like I said, a lot more of a complete defenseman than a lot of people think. I think Perunovich can kind of come in and fill that role for the Blues a little bit. Obviously, he's not going to be that number 1 defenseman or number 2 defenseman that Parayko can play with, but I think he's going to be a very solid addition to the back end of the St. Louis Blues, and he showed that in his playoff games that he was in. And just got very limited minutes, obviously being out there on the power play. I think having a full offseason of training with the Blues and being able to bulk up a little bit, add a little bit to that frame. And, he was dealing with an injury all season. So who knows if he was even 100% when he did play. So I think Perunovich can be a really big impact player for the St. Louis Blues next season. Because, like I said, I don't see Nick Leddy coming back. The Blues have to bring back Perron, Leddy, and Husso. Don't have to, but, those are their big 3 guys that are up for new contracts. And I definitely see them trying to bring Perron back. And that being said, Leddy and Husso Leddy's been asking for $5-6 million for 5 years. It's his last chance to cash in on a big contract. I don't see the Blues giving him that sort of deal. So for that reason, I think he's going to be walking. And that brings in the question, if the Blues do want to go out and try to add to their defensive core and add a really big guy, how the heck are they going to do that? And I've seen 2 scenarios proposed, and I kind of want to go over both of them briefly before jumping into the third segment here. And the first one is trading Vladimir Tarasenko for a defenseman. Now, theoretically, that's Travis Sanheim or something like that. Not sure exactly what the trade would be in that scenario, but hopefully if my connection just went down on the YouTube video, apologies in advance, but should be good for you guys audio wise. Anyways, I'll repeat myself in case the connection did cut out. I said I think the easiest solution would be, Vladimir Tarasenko for Ivan Provorov, 1-for-1, or Travis Sanheim or whatever, or Jacob Chychrun. On the surface, that makes the most sense, and it's probably the easiest way the Blues could A, clear up the cap space needed for a big defenseman, and B, just trade for a big defenseman, because there aren't a lot of options on the free agency market for a big defenseman. It would most likely have to come via a trade. And Tarasenko is the obvious guy there. Now, the flip side of that is Vladimir Tarasenko, I don't think still has that trade request public. Or not public, but, I don't know if that's still valid, and I would assume that it's not. The way that the season went and the way that the postseason comments went from Doug Armstrong, it sounds like Vladimir Tarasenko wants to stay, and I'm happy for him. I think he had a rejuvenated season with the Blues. I think he had he had one of his best seasons in a very long time. Probably his best season since the injuries. And that's, encouraging for Blues fans and for the organization. And he also has a full no trade clause. So any trade that you would want to draw up with Tarasenko, he would have to agree to. And, I don't think he's going to want to go to Arizona for Jacob Chychrun. I don't think he's going to want to play in a college hockey arena for the next, 5 years or however long the Arizona Coyotes are sticking with that arena. So I think a Tarasenko trade is the most sensical in terms of easiest way to acquire a top-tier defenseman, but I don't think it's the most likely. The other trade that I saw is a combination of Ivan Barbashev and one of the Blues' top forward prospects in Zach Bolduc or Jake Neighbors. I think that one is a little more likely. However, I think Jake Neighbors and Zach Bolduc are are kind of two really big pieces of the forward core that you'd have to be very, very certain about the return you're getting in order to part with those guys. The Blues window, you could call it a window, is in terms of their current core is coming to a close, but I think they have a good enough group of young pieces where it's not going to be a situation where they just kind of like flounder at the bottom of the league. I think if they keep those young pieces in place, the Blues will do a very good job of contending when guys like Ryan O'Reilly and David Perron and even Vladimir Tarasenko, Justin Falk, when those guys are starting to decline a little bit, they have young pieces in place. Now, if you trade a guy like Zach Bolduc or Jake Neighbors along with Ivan Barbashev, which first of all, I will say, I think trading Ivan Barbashev makes a lot of sense. I think his stock is the highest it will ever be. And his playoff performance or lack thereof is a little bit more indicative that he'll probably fall back down to earth next season and might not be a 25 goal scorer like he was this year. So yeah, I think trading Ivan Barbashev makes sense. His stock is high. You could probably get a decent return for him. However, if they're doing that, I think the move has to be for a younger defenseman. The Blues already have plenty of defensemen around 29, 30 years old that are signed on long-term deals. And I don't think that it would make sense to acquire another guy like that, because then you would just have a top four of Justin Falk, Torrey Krug, Colton Parayko, and new defensemen, and they would all be, in 4 years, they'd all be 34, 35, making $6 million a piece. And I don't think that that's a recipe for success. I think look at what the San Jose Sharks have done, and that's proof that it's not a recipe for success. So it would have to be a younger guy like Jacob Chychrun, like Travis Sanheim, like Ivan Provorov. And I think that trade could be possible with Ivan Barbashev plus a prospect, but not a guarantee. So that's sort of the checking in on the current state of the Blues offseason moves. As the offseason gets closer, obviously, I'm going to have more updates on that, so make sure you stay tuned to the show for that. But that being said, in this third and final segment, I'm going to be talking about the Tampa Bay Lightning versus Colorado Avalanche and Springfield Thunderbirds versus Chicago Wolves. So make sure you stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right. Third and final segment. And let's talk about some non-Blues news, shall we? So the Springfield Thunderbirds, if you guys don't know, if you haven't been following along, they are in the Colorado Cup Finals against the Chicago Wolves. Now, unfortunately, they find themselves down 2-1, and they did lose both of their games in pretty rough fashion. They won game 1 in overtime, but then they lost game 2 like 6-2, and then they lost game 3 4-0. So they're in a bit of a precarious situation right now. I don't think all hope is lost for them. I think that they have the capability, they have the experience, they have the physicality to contend in a series like this. I don't think all hope is lost. I had someone DM me on Twitter asking for where you can watch it. And if you go to, I think it's like watchahl.com or something. If you just search watch AHL playoffs, it's $30 for the remainder of the playoffs, which a little steep on the service because there might only be a few games left. So you can also, I think it's like $8 for a singular game. So maybe there'll be 2 games left in the season, $8, $16. If you don't want to spend the money, totally understandable, but also like it's fun hockey. And if you've got, $30 sitting around, I would definitely recommend it. Thunderbirds play a very entertaining style. They play old school hockey, old style hockey, a lot of physicality, a lot of grit, very similar to the Blues of 2019. So definitely check that out. They play again tonight, I believe. Yeah, they do. They play again tonight, game 4. Chance to tie the series up at 2 games apiece. So make sure you stay tuned to that. I'll be tweeting about it. I'll be talking about it on Monday's episode. So if you missed the game, you can always hear what I have to say about it. So that being said, there is another hockey game tonight. And it's in the Stanley Cup Finals. And the Stanley Cup will be in the building. Colorado Avalanche are up 3-1 over the Tampa Bay Lightning. And real quick, I want to talk about that overtime winning goal, which first of all, I don't want to say I called it, but I called it. If you listen to Wednesday's episode, I talked about how I think adding Nazem Kadri back is going to be, I said that Nazem Kadri will be a big impact piece for the Colorado Avalanche. Will sort of be a needle mover. I like to use that term a lot. Tommy likes to use that term a lot. Just a guy that, if the match is 50-50, the match is even, a guy that can really just push the needle towards your favor, in your favor. And Nazem Kadri is a guy that I think can do that. And sure enough, he scored the overtime winner. Now, there was some controversy with it, and I will talk about that, even though I don't think the controversy was very warranted. Nazem Kadri goes in, receives a pass, scores the overtime winner. But wait, a 6th Colorado Avalanche player has both his skates on the ice as he's getting off and getting on the bench. For a line change, technically there's too many men on the ice, and the game sheet also has 6 players on the ice. Oh no. Okay. Were there 6 players on the ice when the Colorado Avalanche scored their game-winning goal? Technically, yes. Does the rule of too many men on the ice state that the 6th player or the extra player has to engage with the play for it to be a violation? Also, yes. Was the extra Colorado player engaging with the play at any point? No. Was it too many on the ice by rule? Probably not. A lot of people have pointed out that the Tampa Bay Lightning had 7 players on the ice when they scored against the New York Islanders last year, or that they also had 6 players on the ice when the Colorado Avalanche scored their game-winning goal. Whatever. Those type of plays happen a lot. And honestly, if the Blues were on the receiving end of that, I might be sitting here complaining about it. But from an outside perspective, it just kind of seems like a bit of sore loser play from the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Tampa Bay Lightning have always kind of been a bit of sore losers, especially Nikita Kucherov gets a little chippy when they're losing. So I don't have a whole lot of sympathy there. I've seen people comparing it to the hand pass goal, and I think that's just ridiculous. I think, it would be one thing if there were six Colorado Avalanche players engaged in the play and rushing into the zone. And that's how they scored, but that's not what happened. There was a guy that was on the ice for a split second before the goal was scored, and then he was getting off the ice. And John Cooper goes in the press conference, "Oh, my heart breaks for these guys. You'll know we should still be playing right now." It's like, I get it. When you lose like that, when you lose in overtime, it's like when you're playing 2K with your friends or whatever. You're like, "Oh, this game's rigged." You love to blame things other than yourself for the loss. And do I think the Colorado Avalanche having 6 players on the ice is the reason they scored? Absolutely not. I don't think the Colorado or the Tampa Bay Lightning think that either. I think it's just easier to make an excuse when you've been winning for the last 3 years and you've had infinite playoff success, and all of a sudden you run into an opponent that has you figured out. It can be a little easy to search for excuses like that. Again, I can only say so much, because if the St. Louis Blues were in that position, decent chance I'd be here complaining about it. But that's hockey, that's sports. It's easy to sit here, from an outside perspective, fly on the wall, like, "Oh, those crybabies. It wasn't even too many men." So whatever. That being said, though, Colorado, spectacular game. First real goaltending duel of the playoffs of the Stanley Cup Final, and Darcy Kemper won somehow. Vasilevsky's been okay. He actually has a worse save percentage than Darcy Kemper, but Darcy Kemper did get chased in a game, and Vasilevsky stayed in when Colorado was scoring a lot of goals. So, I don't think the stats tell the whole story, but I will stand corrected. I thought that Colorado's goaltending was going to be their Achilles heel in this series, and that Darcy Kemper wasn't capable of leading a team to a Stanley Cup. And now, who knows, by the time that you guys are listening to this episode, the Colorado Avalanche might have already won the Stanley Cup. Exciting stuff. So that being said, Monday's episode might be the first true off-season episode for the NHL, for the Locked On Blues podcast. So make sure you stay tuned by hitting that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you listen to me on. Subscribe to the YouTube channel Locked On Blues. Hit that notification bell. That way, whenever I upload a new episode, you'll be the first to know. Also, hit that like button. It helps the algorithm a lot. It helps more people see it. The more people that see the show, the better the content gets. It's pretty simple. Follow all of the Locked On Blues social accounts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. You can follow my Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. That being said, though, that is all the time I have. So thanks so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.